Hey everyone, welcome to our workshop today on identifying your focus metric. Thanks so much for joining. So really today, the sort of goal of the session is for you to walk away knowing what a focus metric is and how to create one for your company. We do have some exercises built into the workshop today as well. And like I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A in the chat. So yeah, let's get started. So to quickly introduce myself, my name's Harriet, and I'm one of our customer success managers here at Mixpanel. I work out of our EMEA location, so I'm based in London. And I help companies across the region find, measure, and move their metrics, including focus metrics, so helping people to define those. I've kind of had experience working at different stages of companies, and obviously as part of my role, I work with a lot of different businesses. And that then takes us through to our guest speaker today, who is Idan, and I will pass over to him.
Thank you, Harriet, for the intro. So basically, I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked in founding my own companies for around 10 years. And I've then joined Viber, one of the largest messaging apps out there. One out of, I think, four of the largest. And one of our challenges there was really focus. And I'd like to go ahead and, through this workshop, give you a better picture of what I mean by focus, also for startups and also for bigger companies. And one of the things that I've been doing in the past and currently advising companies is really trying to understand their user behavior and combine that with the market dynamics, with the, how the market behaves with your product to highlight these opportunities, these growth opportunities. So basically, I'm here to help you reach your goals. That said, let's pass to the next slide and talk a little bit about you. Okay, so first of all, thanks for sharing with us that information on the survey you guys filled. This is kind of representing where each one of you are at in terms of stage. And looking through this, as both Harriet and I mentioned, we have kind of experience that is relevant both for companies at, for example, the ideation stage and the P stage, and of course, scaling stage. So now, just kind of like, going through the day-to-day of a startup entrepreneur or founder, you probably heard about the warnings of falling in love with your product or wanting to solve a problem, for everyone. You start out with something and then you accidentally kind of like make this product bigger, and then just later on you realize where you kind of wandered off to. So you're jumping from one opportunity to another in an attempt to really, keep your head above water as an entrepreneur. And basically this is a part where, we should kind of like try and focus on those prototypes. And you've probably heard about the build, measure, learn models and building an MVP, right? But it's super hard to stay objective to whether product adoption or whatever responses that you get actually represent the true picture, right? It's like users love what you're doing, right? Yeah, the first people that spend, 5 seconds on your app, 1 minute in your app, you kind of get the picture that they love what they're seeing, that they're returning, but are these those good users that you're looking for? Is that being really objective to what you're trying to achieve? Now, I'm talking about this, but I failed at this several times. So, that said, this is where I believe, great products and founders, easily fail at this. It's, we're always trying to build, right? We're running fast to try to build that, product we love, or that product we're envisioning to be the next big thing. But what we're basically focused on is actually, thinking about the number of features we need to complete UX-wise or user journey-wise, and for the user to get a good experience. But we're not necessarily thinking about how we measure success, or what is a success or win scenario for our for us, defining that, those core users or those power users, and how to measure if they're behaving the way we expect them to. So if there's one thing I'd like you to take out of this work session, it's that, okay? How to spend more time on how our success scenario would look like, and to find a way how to measure it. And only then think about product and UX. Because once the goal is clear, and once these definitions are you know, sharp and transparent with everyone, or you know, that's the point where we could actually see progress and start growing. So these are metrics you guys shared with us at this point, and I'm guessing, you know, as you look through them, maybe some of you would say, hey, these are better metrics than the other, but you know, they all could serve as a good starting point. And you know, this is a work in progress, so we may want to improve them as we go along. It could be something to start with, like for example, I remember 10 years ago with my first company, it was you need to get like 100,000 downloads if you're a B2C in order to get funded. And like today, who cares about downloads, right? It's basically about usage and retention and engagement. And you know, the fact that we're looking at this from a startup perspective, I just want to share with you that, you know, bigger companies, these market leaders, are going through the same challenges. And, you know, while they have the money and the teams and, you know, infinite resources, what they're lacking is this clarity and focus. And I think that this is the opportunity where startups could actually, like startups that do this good, could probably, you know, win those games. So it's super important. And so again, you know, what we're trying to achieve here is what would be the best way to measure success for our products. So let's jump right in. Okay. So we saw a lot of metrics. We probably heard about vanity versus focus metric. This is kind of to give you a picture of, you know, getting like KPIs of things you would measure, and then how you would transform it to have to you know, it being a growth KPI, something that could help you eventually. If you measure it correctly, you could eventually use that for growth. So, for example, right, you know, at the early days of behavioral analytics, the concept of active users was novel, right? So companies would measure everyone who went into their product and app and did a, you know, key action that will drive him value. But while these, you know, metrics are important to get kind of like a picture of, you know, digital health for your product, it's, you know, it's the main goal is really to try and understand how we could have long-term users. So it's kind of like focusing on those users that matter, or your best users or power users, instead of just seeing who opens like your app. So just, you know, as an example, so imagine like it's a banking app, right? Or for example, a food ordering app. So you open the app, that could be one thing. So how many users open that app versus show me those users that placed 3 orders in 7 days. Okay, or viewed 6 reports and used it like 6 X features a week. So that's the general idea, and this is a mindset we should be thinking of. Not just tracking an action, but the overview of this is trying to understand what behavior is a good behavior, is a behavior that would, if we grow that type of behavior, it would represent our strength in the industry, in the market for our product.
I think as well on this one, like looking at some of the metrics that were sent in on the previous slide, they were all kind of key actions, which I think is great. But I think the difference here is maybe adding that time element to it. So, you know, what's the time you're looking at with that key action? So I could see there was one for parking reservations on the previous slide. So, you know, what period of time is that in? Is it weekly? Is it daily? Is it monthly? You know, what is the time that you're aiming for with those metrics? And some people use the SMART framework as well for KPIs. So, you know, thinking about the different elements of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Totally right. Thank you, Harriet. So who's involved in the creation of the focus metric? Now, this might seem a bit, you know, more challenging question as the organization gets bigger. But basically, right, it could be anyone. But like from my perspective, as a product person, I found it that, you know, since product kind of lead strategy, eventually we should ask, right? What is the company or what is the product trying to achieve? It could be the CEO. And in this case, right, it could be also anyone else in the company that's trying to drive this. The journey in this would be completely different, but basically the creation of it could be each team in specific, each specific team, or, product leading this cross company. So back to Harriet's comment, customer value and natural frequency, that usage interval, meaning those users that return and do that action again, you want to check for that interval, because that would tell you, the frequency in which a good user would be expected to act. So, how do you decide on this focus metric? It's kind of like, when I went through this exercise, for example, at Viber, so Viber is a messaging app. So for me, it was, but by the way, I'm located in Tel Aviv, Israel. Forgot to mention that. So WhatsApp is very strong here. And looking at WhatsApp and thinking, kind of observing how I interact with a product, and then thinking, am I a power user, an average user? Where do I stand in that, basically kind of like gap? And so when I was thinking about WhatsApp, I realized that I should look for a specific use case where someone would be active each day. And active, for us, it was sending a message or starting a call. Okay, so if I'm an average user and I use that every day, or I do that action every day, so the customer value of sending a message and the frequency is daily, okay, then I would expect to be looking at users that would do this, for example, every day of the week. Another thing you should keep in mind, and this is to understand like also the strategy, is what game are we playing, right? Is this like a attention game? Depends on the product. Each product usually has a different game. It could be a mix of two, but if you really filter this down to your core, you would see that it could either be relevant to attention, transaction, or productivity. Now, attention is the time user spends in the app. So how much attention, so time spent, this could be, for example, a company that monetizes on ads. So time spent would eventually affect the revenue, right, for the company. So transaction is the number of purchases, like Amazon or any food ordering. And productivity, how many tasks is the user completing? This for us was like messaging. Okay, so a task would be, I want to communicate with my friend, family. So how many times am I doing that? Harriet, would you like to add anything here for this one?
No, I think that covers it. But yeah, I think it can be kind of trial and error as well when you first start doing this in terms of the natural frequency. And like Idan said, it can be good to look at sort of power users, less regular users, and kind of find the balance and how can we take those less regular users to being more frequent. So yeah, I think, that's a really good summary.
So one of the things that I followed through on this is looking through distribution. So if you're looking at a specific action, a specific customer value, and you're, unfamiliar with what it should be, what should that exact number be, then understanding your current distribution would eventually help you set a goal. And we'll go through this in the next slide, but in one of the next slides, but it's basically, you don't have to have the right answer for this. This could be, one thing that may change, and you just need to be aware of that and be able to track and iterate and be willing to do that. All right, so that said, just going into another example for this. So, okay, so that, for example, would be, played video and media for media industry. And then when it would happen is probably on a daily basis. That's the usage interval. Okay, so finance, complete a transaction, right? And the same with e-commerce and SaaS. So you can go ahead and list the actions that your product creates for value, and then filter through or eliminate everything until you come down to that most important one. So one of the things we had at Viber, again, just to go with that example, is we weren't sure if it should be send a message, start a call, or consume media, and there were around 15 to 20 more. Okay, so we filtered it down to what value do we provide our users? What do we market to our users? What is on the app stores? And based on that, we realized that, the most of what we thought was important is not important. This isn't the core. And by focusing on your core, right, you can then improve on that. So this is the part when I'm saying, like, you start with one product and you iterate on the product and then it becomes too big. That's because you kind of like shift focus from the core, because as startups, you look for these opportunities that will get you to the next step. And sometimes, going for funding could help that challenge, could actually, increase that challenge, because you're trying to get to the next stage, you're starting to get to the next funding point, and your product loses focus. So, just stopping this kind of like lecture mode and going into more of an engaging mode, I just want to go ahead and give you just one example from Dropbox, so you guys can go ahead and practice this. Okay, so for example, right, list the actions in your product that create value for users. So for Dropbox, it would be upload a file, right, sync folder, file updates, share a file, collaborate, or download and access. Right now, what would be most important for Dropbox, right? The value moment that would probably, kind of be interesting for Dropbox is securely accessing and downloading files, right? So thinking of that, what would be that frequency that they would use? Would it be like on a weekly basis, right? On a daily basis? And so go through it, right? And then there is no right answer to this, but you could understand from that distribution functionality that, by the way, Mixpanel also has. You could then try and understand better if you're looking to daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly. Now, let's say it's like 2 days. Okay, so there's a way to calculate that. I won't go into this now, but if you guys want, you could go ahead and ask that in Q&A, and we can maybe follow up if you need it. But there is a way to calculate that usage interval. But if, for example, you do that calculation, it comes down to like 2 days, then you could decide if you're going to go for daily or weekly. I would go for daily, because it's more for the daily. So you kind of like ground that number. So if it's like 5 days, I would go for the weekly. If it's like 13 days, then you could do weekly or monthly, based on what you think the good user interaction would feel like. And again, you could start with something and iterate to see if that helps you out. So for Dropbox, it may be weekly.
Okay. We look at weekly here at Mixpanel as well. Yeah, just to put that into context too.
So I guess now it's your turn. So let's take like 2 minutes and try to work through this example. Think about your product, think about those value moments, and then think about the time frame, right? And feel free to just share your proposals in the group chat. You can find it if you go like to the Zoom chat, and you can go ahead and feel free to share with us, and maybe we can go ahead and discuss it.
We've actually had a question come through from Neil. So I don't know if you can see that one, Idan, but I'll read it out for the group. I've typically focused on weighing across a variety of action metrics and coming up with a single score for a given user based on an amalgam of actions. But is it better to just focus on a single metric? I don't know if you have any opinions on that one.
So we had debated about that. Like the metric needs to make sense. If there's a North Star metric or one metric that matters, it means that the metric that you eventually choose, it should lead you to your goal. So if you have several metrics, it might be that you could look at this like in a hierarchy kind of a way, where one would be on top, and then those would be the others would be metrics that you measure, but not necessarily would be that focus metric that you're measuring. So it's okay to measure more than one metric. It's just a matter of, you know, what would eventually be the most important one that when you look at it, that would represent how strong or how successful you are in your industry or for your product.
Yeah,
Hope
and
that answer the question.
I think a single metric as well for the focus metric can make it easier for, you know, multiple people to get aligned and involved on a higher level.
Yeah, so basically that's usually what happens. Some metrics create tension, and it's great to have tension between metrics, but there's also tension between teams because, you know, what you're trying to do, let's say your product, you're trying to get engagement. And then you have marketing and sales trying to get more people in, because that's what, you know, eventually that's how they get their bonus, or that's how their you know, their platform, their you know, incentives for sales are usually based on the total amount of users you bring in. But if you're able to hook them into this focus metric, they will go ahead and bring you those good users, right? So it's really a matter of, you know, being that person that constantly, you know, pitches that metric the same way you pitch your company, or you pitch your value, and really it's something that you also need to also consider other opinions on. So you know, other people may be right, and this specific metric might be not representative for the company, but it really depends on the goal. If the goal is aligned and you can prove that the metric addresses that goal, then everyone should be okay and aligned with your metric.
Someone has asked as well if you'd recommend this approach for B2B companies as well, especially if they're sales heavy. Actions done per week seems more consumer focused.
Actions done per week. Well, first of all, I think that yes, it's not necessarily industry like B2C or B2B relevant. I think it's relevant for you as a person on how to be more focused and efficient. So take this to your personal world, right? So time spent watching, you know, time spent on your phone is a metric that Apple is presenting to you, right, every week. So it really depends on how you measure your business. If sales would do number of actions, you know, per customer or something like that, I think it was, right? Harriet, correct me if I'm wrong, was number of actions per user?
Yeah.
Yeah, so from the B2B end, what is a user? Is it like the account? Is the user that end user? And so you could also create a subset of users, which is good users. And then those good users could be across the different B2B or, you know, customers. And eventually, maybe it won't matter to you where these good users are coming from one organization or across all the organizations that, let's say, all of your customers. So end users versus customers. And so really, it really depends on your goal and what you're trying to achieve. Harriet, do we have any suggestions for specific actions or value moments?
We do actually. So Alexander Berger has sent in a really good example. So yeah, Alex, I don't know if you're open to us sharing your, I'm working through your example that you've got here. Feel free to raise your hand if you are okay with us kind of digging into that in a bit more detail. Well, he shared it in the chat anyway, so I'm guessing he's.
Oh, yep, I think I'm unmuted. Hey. And yeah, I'm happy to. I'd love to run through this actually, because I think this is a really good exercise, and I have some ideas, but I don't feel like I'm all the way there.
Don't worry about it. We'd love to do this.
So I'll just summarize it real quickly then. So Our product is essentially Google Docs for writing JavaScript code in the browser. And we kind of meet that last question where we have a B2B product that goes behind the firewall where, you know, you can't just go use it before talking to sales, but we also have a free public product that anyone can just go to stackblitz.com and use. So I think we probably are interested in essentially our top of funnel is our free user base, right? So I in my mind, there may be like what you were talking about, kind of a tier of metrics where you have some that are relevant just for the free usage, and then maybe you have another tier kind of deeper into the funnel. But I'm particularly curious about thinking about the top of funnel, right? And so in terms of value moments, what I wrote down was creating, sharing, or updating a project. Pretty straightforward, you know, imagine the Google Docs example. Where we do have a couple other, I think, important moments are you can then save the project to like GitHub, which shows, you know, a more serious interaction, or you could deploy it to Firebase or something like that, showing that you want a live demo app. So those seem important. I'm not sure how, you know, what's the process you'd recommend to sort of identify the metric and then identify the frequency that makes sense?
Harriet, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I suppose thinking ultimately about what is it you're aiming for. So is it increased paid users rather than, because you mentioned free users as well, right?
Correct. I think the number one goal for the organization would be to identify and promote sort of free users who want to become enterprise customers. That would be the primary goal.
Okay, so yeah, I'd say that would actually be your focus metric, would be around, you know, increasing the number of those types of users. And then the value moments that you've listed there around creating, sharing, or updating a project, like how does that behavior feed into those types of users? I don't know what you think as well, Idan.
Yeah, so I think you know the first thing you mentioned, and it's our next slide, is right. What stage is this? Are you at, right? Where are you focused on improving? And use the top of the funnels, for example, it could be user acquisition, and it could be activation. It seems to me that at this point you're looking at activation, right? And you're looking at the conversion of those activated users to being paid users. So, right, so you could look at this as like, I want to increase top of the funnel, or I want to go ahead and, you know, increase paying users or revenue. So you need to kind of make a decision on where you want to focus on that. Once you decide that, then what I would do is try to, you know, try to understand what would eventually differentiate a paying customer from not paying customer. And one of the ways you could do it is you like create a cohort for those paying users and try to see what they do versus the ones that don't do it. And looking through those behavior patterns, you try to see if there's a way to convert, right? Is there a set of actions that they do that will convert? And then, you know, it could be a little that I'm walking you through something that's a little bit challenging at this point, but I'm saying that could be a way for you to, you know, methodologically really find the right thing. If it's not if you can't go through that process, then just pick one. You know, try it out, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, check the stats, and then change, you know, if it's a small company, right? If you can iterate quickly on that. And, but basically you need to understand, it doesn't matter really what you pick. If you pick something and then you test yourself, then you evolve. And that means you're going the right way. But if you wanted to look for the methodological way, then it's what I suggest with analyzing cohorts.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, actually, we have this really cool tool called Mixpanel that, that makes a lot of sense, right? Go in, identify the users that convert, create a cohort, and then sort of track that back to a set of criteria that is more unique to that cohort. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the insights. I appreciate it.
For sure.
We
Thanks
also did a similar. We did a similar exercise at Mixpanel as well, funnily enough. So we do act on what we kind of advise. We actually have a blog post on it as well, and it kind of shows you how we got to sort of our value moment and our kind of the definition of an active user for us and when people get to the value. So yeah, we can put a link to that in as well, because I think it's kind of relevant. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Harriet, I'm wondering if we have time for another example. Do you want to go ahead and jump to the next one? Because we have more exercises along the road.
I think in the interest of time, we should probably head on, should we? Or
okay, yeah, I think the idea is clear. Maybe if there's something unique, maybe in the Q&A or something that you think that we didn't cover, and then it'll help us if you could take a look just one last time, and then.
We've had a couple of questions come through.
Okay, maybe we can address those quickly.
Yeah, definitely. So one actually from Heather around, they have a product and it's end-to-end meeting management software, and it provides a different benefit depending on the user. So for some, it's creating and sharing agendas, others viewing meeting stats, other specific integrations at their fingertips. Must you pick one focus, or can different user profiles support multiple key metrics?
Yeah, so my answer to that is we defined at Viber, you know, something that combines several. It was 2 to be precise, but it was more than one. And so you could be more focused and select only one. But if a user gets value from your product from by doing either that or that, then I think it makes sense to combine those. I would, though, try to think what if there's a specific user segment that is more important to your business, then that would kind of like drive me to that answer. If it's okay, if both of them have all of them have the same weight, or there's one, specifically that stands out. It's kind of like my thoughts.
And also when we go into the kind of the framework a bit later on as well, there could be, one overall focus metric, but then the different types of user behavior and different types of features relevant to different users could kind of be maybe the level 2 that feed into that, which we'll explain in a bit more detail.
Yep.
We had another question as well, which was just around, it was from Amol, and it's how often should you revisit your focus metric, especially as you introduce new features?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Harriet? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. How often should you revisit your focus metric, especially as you introduce new features?
Yeah, so like my thought on this is like, you're supposed to introduce new features that affect that metric. They won't necessarily all affect that metric, but if it's a good focus metric and it's what drives your goal, then you should be looking to improve that goal, or be closer to that goal, get yourself closer to that goal. If sometimes you introduce features and you get different adoption or different user behavior. For example, this is the things that leads to like pivots in a company and startups. Then it's okay to revisit your that goal, but you should think of this not as a feature-oriented decision, but more as like a goal-oriented decision. If your goal changes, then your metric might change, but features shouldn't drive that. Okay. So should we dive into the next slide? All right. So. Okay, so wait, sorry, this doesn't, okay, here you go. So, we talked about different stages that your product and company could be at. If you're at a growth stage, or, you could think of, right, maybe top of the funnel, or maybe you want to grow retention or engagement, then you're at different points, at your, I would say, product roadmap stage or product stage. And there are different frameworks that can help you look at this. One of them is pirate metrics. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard about, about this. So, just an example, right? Top of the funnel was shared right now. It's like, for example, let's look at Uber, right? So then like how many new downloads do they have this week? New users. Okay, so activation would be, enter the credit card. Retention, so it would be come back, and then revenue, of course, right? If they become, let's say a buying customer, but it could be average revenue per user, divided by, average revenue per user. So that could be, there's also a question about ratios, having ratios as focus metrics. We can maybe touch that a bit later, but just, as to put some attention into it, I think it's best to not use ratios. It's because ratios is like two metrics that are correlated, so one affects the other. And you could get like a negative effect without even being on the wrong path. So, for example, well, you know what? Let's go into it maybe later on because I don't want to shift from this subject. So there's different ways, different frameworks to look at this. Growth loops could be one of them, and focus metric. It really based on like a hierarchy type of way of doing this. It's kind of like a hybrid of these frameworks. And Harriet just mentioned it in the previous question. So Harriet, you want to go maybe and explain a little bit about this, how maybe these levels of hierarchy could help you build out your focus metric?
Yeah, definitely. So what we have here is kind of our measurement framework that we use with customers, and we use it as part of our implementation process as well. And what it kind of does is help you align your different metrics. So you can see you have the focus metric at the top, and then underneath that focus metric, you have metrics that feed into that. So when we were talking about Heather's example before with, different parts of the product, this is maybe where, you've got so you've got your focus metric, you've got tier 2 and you've got tier 3. It's maybe where some of those tier 2 and tier 3 might come in. And in those kind of second level metrics, you can see they fall into different brackets around reach, activation, engagement, retention, and business specific. And I think as well, this links back to Alex before, who was talking about cohorts. And so cohorts can be a great way as well of kind of, looking at these different areas to see maybe where you need to focus. And Idan mentioned it before as well around, is our focus reach? Are we looking to acquire new users? Or do we have loads of new users, but our focus needs to be more on retaining those users? So these frameworks can really help you to kind of see where you need to focus and get alignment across teams. So you can see as well, there's different owners for these different metrics for different teams. And we've actually filled this in with an example of a company called KOYA, which is a geolocation gifting service. So you can see a couple of examples within here. So their focus metric was around weekly active messages and gifts. So they've actually defined that as weekly within there. And then you can see a couple of other things. So their reach is signups, and their engagement metric is around conversions divided by their weekly active users as well. I think we've had a question as well. So how to prioritize? It seems too many metrics to me, referring to KOYA example.
Yeah, so prioritization on this is basically going back to that example I gave before, is this tied to your goal? So let's say, I'm at a stage of, activation, okay, send first message. So, taking this back, for example, to Viber, okay, so I want to activate users. Is it enough that a user send a first, let's say, is it enough that a user opens the app? What would define activation? would it be a send message or a conversation? Like send message and receive the message back. Okay, like a two-way conversation. So that can change, and you could have all these three in activation. But then what are you trying to achieve in your goal? If you're trying to achieve, right, let's say, so Viber is a messaging app, but, you know, if we only have one-sided conversations or communication, we won't have conversations. And if we want to grow, we need to create more conversations. So that would for me, would say, you know, focus on that message sent on one end and reply and received a reply back. That to me would be like counted out as like an activated user. And that's kind of how I would walk through this. So first, it's what stage am I at? Reach, activation, engagement, retention, where I want to focus, or where that goal is related to, and and then dive into that bucket and try to filter out, you know, let's say eliminate those other metrics that you think that, you know, maybe won't have that big of effects. Once you start eliminating, or once you start focusing on the bucket, you see it gets a lot easier. But one of the nice things with these examples is that it gives you a more heuristic like look of your business, of your product. When the industry gets bigger, when your product gets bigger, when your company gets bigger, then people tend to forget, you know, what others are doing, and you know, why things are important to specific stakeholders. And when you map this out, it gives you a clearer picture of how things connect, how people collaborate between them to reach that goal. So this is an exercise that doesn't necessarily only give you that focused metric, but also gives you a better understanding of the business.
I think that's a really good summary, actually. We did a similar exercise with kind of a quite established business, and we plotted different cohorts based on the life cycle. And what we identified was that they were acquiring a lot of new users, but when you dug down into the retention of those users, it was just falling off. So that's where they decided to focus on their product, was how can we keep those users and keep them more engaged? So yeah, I think, you know, looking at where your focus needs to be is a really good point.
Yeah, I think like when I gave you the examples at the beginning, we're saying like, you know, these big companies, these market leaders actually doing these mistakes or not having that focus. It's exactly here. It's, you know, they have like millions of new users every day, or like, you know, hundreds of thousands of users every day. But they're not looking at what these users are actually doing, and it's what they're doing good for the business, bad for the business, or benefiting the business in any type of form. And so the easiest way to grow the numbers is just spend like $1 million in user acquisition. You get those hundreds of users coming in, and then you lose them. It's kind of like, you know, it's funny because like for startups, you know, you get like those 1,000 users, 10,000 users, you're hyped, right? You focus on each user. But as, you know, companies get bigger, these numbers are just numbers. And most of the things they look at is totals and averages. And, you know, for startups, the fact that we focus on those, you know, like let's say, you know, we focus as a user, we look at a user as a customer and not as a user, is what kind of like sets us apart, and what gives us as startup founders the advantage to win the game when we're trying to compete with market leaders.
And it goes back to those vanity metrics as well. You know, are we just doing something because it's going to make a number look good on paper, or are we actually doing this because it's going to, you know, impact our focus metric by X? So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Most of the things that are collected are vanity metrics, and you won't imagine like how many times I've asked, okay, but why do we care about this, or why we're trying to do something? And people just say, you know, they don't really know. But that's also a way, and this is kind of like a switch to the next slide. Like once you have that product metric, how do you create that buy-in among everyone? Okay, so, you know, how do you focus? There's so many, and everyone, all the different stakeholders are kind of like pitching in their own metrics. And so how do you do it? Doing this at Viber took me a long time, But eventually, what the way I was able to do this, and by the way, just to share with you, we've been able to change the focus metric for the company. So imagine that big of a company focusing on one thing, and then it shifts focus to another thing. And having this also tied, with, I would say, like productivity of every, each employee, and having them being incentivized to reaching that goal, that was amazing. You should see that impact, once people agree and understand why that thing is important, things just get a lot more efficient. And so what I used is, there's kind of like a psychology strategy that you could go ahead and mirror what you're thinking to someone else and get him to think that they thought of it themselves. So it's kind of like if I thought that we had a big debate on should it be conversations or should it be, like, for example, active users or users that are active each day of the week. And so you kind of like set the pros and cons, but what I did, I like went to each like head of department or head of something and just, pitched them my set of metrics and asked them to think about it, and then followed up the next day or next week. And then with each one, like imagine it was like I was handling these relationships like with 10 different teams. And then I would do the syncs. I would go ahead and create those Excel sheets that would prioritize and for voting and for setting pros and cons. And, so, but basically it's keeping people involved. When they feel involved, they understand and they will cooperate once, you come to an agreement on a metric, and eventually you could come, to an agreement. Because once you're metrics driven and goal driven, then people don't speak about their inner like feelings or thoughts. They share, or they become a lot more efficient because they look at the facts. It's a lot easier to prove with data than prove with you should listen to me, I'm a PM, I'm experienced, so basically data helps. And that's kind of like really, it sets like the example really talks about all the three bullets. It's the workshops, it's the road shows, it's really a game of convincement, convincing everyone to be aligned on something. But you can't like, right, you need to have your facts straight, and you should be willing to listen, because you looking at things from one point of view and different point of views could eventually get you to a better metric. As we said in the beginning, it's a process. So there is no right and wrong, right? There is the metric that is right now for that goal, and it may change. So everyone should also be aligned with that journey, with where we're trying to, where we're trying to go, what we're trying to achieve. So yeah. So basically, right, so involve others, and you could start small, start with that metric that you think is is important to you, and evolve to make sure that that you're listening, and that it's kind of like a process that that everyone's aware of. So don't feel overwhelmed with all those metrics that you have, or with all these questions that you may have at the beginning, especially for if you're a startup where you don't necessarily have product market fit, or you don't understand who your target customers are, or what's the opportunity, or how you're going to get your next funding using that. It's a work in progress. And as Harriet said before, you could set SMART goals. Okay, so they need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Sorry, Harriet, is there anything you wanted to add maybe on that? I just flipped through a slide.
I think that covered it.
Cool. Okay. So forecasting the goal. Okay, right? So, right, Alex shared with us, something that may be his metric, but how do you set that number that you're trying to reach? So let's say, for example, if it was like the Viber I shared, the metric I shared at Viber. So let's say the number is 2. How do I make it, should I make it 5 or should I make it 10? How should I know? So first thing is like benchmark. You have App Annie, you have app reviews. You kind of understand, if your competitor is succeeding in something or not. And then kind of like assume based on market share, maybe, right? It depends on the metric, right? But, where you should be in compared to someone else. And there's a lot of publicly available data, just to understand. Just for an example, if you're trying to be the best one, you're the best messaging app in Israel, okay? So you have, for example, an estimated amount of how many smartphone devices there are in Israel, and how many of them have social media, and how many of them, for example, have, I don't know, like, um, not necessarily like social media, but I'm thinking of, like, for example, you could go down to social media and a smartphone or a desktop device. The different types of metrics. I'm trying to think. Maybe I could share the name of something that I have been using a lot. Then maybe I'll share it in the chat later on. But there's tons of data available, and even if it's not 100% accurate, you could follow that, and as we said, iterate. Because what you're trying to see, you're trying to see a growth curve. And when you find the right metric and you're asking the right question and you have the right hypothesis and you get things right, that curve will start to get, on the right, get the right angle, and you'll see yourselves, improving. And, if for example, you set a low enough goal and you hit a higher goal, then it's something you learn about also how you kind of like make decisions or take take estimations or make estimations. So maybe the next time you set that goal, you should set it higher, and you should iterate on that as well. Put like a benchmark for yourself, track yourself week over week, and see if it makes sense that you'll reach the goal. If you're moving fast, then maybe you could raise the bar. If you're moving slow, then lowering the bar shouldn't mean that you're not doing the right thing. It could be just like you overestimated that goal.
We get asked that a lot, actually. How do I know if I'm doing well, and how should I set a goal? And yeah, we do kind of say, benchmark against yourself, like Idan has said, like, what are those incremental improvements? Where were we a year ago versus where we are today? Mixpanel does have some benchmark reports as well for different industries too. So depending on your industry, it could be worth having a look at that as well.
Yeah. So here, I remember that it's called We Are Social. You can look them up. They have tons of digital reports. Every half a year, they issue a new one. Super amazing. Like really. I don't know how accurate, right? But you could estimate a lot better using that data. And I also used App Annie. So for example, I looked at the competitor to Viber. I understood how they behave, for example, in downloads or active users in a specific country. And then I try to understand, for example, for our model, I broke it down to like countries where we're good at, countries where we're bad, and countries where we're kind of like in between, fighting for market share. And so I try to understand how my competition is behaving in that, that same, for example, country or set of countries. And then for me, a goal would be growth. Then what would that mean? That would mean that I should behave like him because he's growing that country. So how much is he growing week over week, month over month? And that was my benchmark. That's at least that first goal I set for myself. I want to grow like X. Yeah, so, right, we had this question. It's like, as the business grows, how do you know if you change the focus metric? So it's basically on the goal. Okay, if the metric fits the goal, stay patient. It might take time till you hit the right, do the right things to change it. And if not, right, pivot. But, how often, it really depends how big the company is and if it aligns with that goal. And how easy it is to communicate. You don't need too many iterations on this. You should spend some time and thought on the first one, and that should eliminate most of the iterations. But if you feel like you need to iterate, then don't be worried about that. Okay, so can an organization have several focus metrics? Okay, and we talked about this as well. So yes, but it could be in the form where Harriet presented, where there is high-level metric like level 0, level 1, level 2, and then they might impact one another. And again, there's like different teams, so we need to be mindful of that. that, for example, sales would be interested in measuring a specific metric. It doesn't need to be the focus metric, but they could have their own focus metric as a team. They just need to keep in mind that the company or, you know, there's a higher goal that eventually everyone should be kind of like, you know, working together to reach. So for example, if it is like a monthly active user goal, then you know, their goal would eventually be, I need to get as many users as possible. But if you go into a kind of like a less vanity metric, like for example, give me those power users that I defined with being active each day of a week, then they should be focused on finding those users. And how do they find those users? You could have like, so there's, you know, more things that we can talk about metrics, which is like lagging metrics, leading metrics. So eventually there could be a set of actions that would lead a user to the desired behavior. So you could think, what would be a proxy for that, you know, for that good behavior? And for example, right, so a power user, someone who is active one day, at least one time a day, every day of the week, you know, if he's active 3 days, then that's a good indication that this guy has the potential to be active more than that. And then you could go ahead and filter this out. Like for example, have users that are active 7 out of 7 days, and then 5 out of 7 days, and then 3 out of 7 days, and then iterate on those buckets and drive people from being active 3 days to 5 days to 7 days. And that's how we kind of like build this. But everyone needs to be aligned on that strategy. So people that are driving those, you know, users to those 3 days are also good for you. You just need to be mindful of what's their role, what are they trying to achieve, and how they're getting incentivized. Because everyone should be incentivized the same way. Same retention bonus for everyone. Yeah, so, right, so this is kind of like the cherry on top. After, you know, lots of hard work and finding that focus metric and getting everyone aligned on that, and, right, you know, kind of like you're the person people look up to now to drive growth for the company. Now, what you have is a bunch of data, and you're trying to really understand that to drive insights, to go ahead and make recommendations on how the business can now grow. It could be like new products, it could be new business models, and it could be like also like low-hanging fruit. So what I did to address this, for example, at Fiverr, is imagine you have such a big market. Now, I know this might be, you might feel to you maybe a little less related to you as startups right now. I just want to share this with you so you understand that this relates to any stage you have in the business, and especially as you get bigger. And if you're looking to grow and you're looking to use metrics to grow, one of the things that I realized as a startup entrepreneur is that, you know, you're trying to build that fast product, right? You're trying to move fast. You actually don't think about analytics at day one. You don't think about this. You don't implement that. You first think about creating the product, that best user experience, and then you think about, oh, now we need to measure what users are doing because it's not working for us. So don't go that way. Go the other way. Go, what should I do? Like, oh, let's say our product is a messaging app, for example. So what would define a good user behavior, and how can I measure that? And so it's send message at a specific time frame, and I need to have at least X users for me to be successful. Now you could start developing or writing code. Okay, so once you have that set up and you went through the whole process, so one of the things that I've been able to do at Fiverr is, and I've kind of like extrapolated this to multi like national or multi-platform kind of like solutions and companies. So it's not necessarily only for Viber, but I'll share with you the kind of like the reasoning behind it. So remember I told you that you can bucket your users like by the days that they're number of days that they're active. That's actually how I arrived at that focus metric. And that's how I was able to drive that change in strategy. So when looking at this and breaking it down, Imagine you have all the users, right? So some of them are, I've set them to be like adopters, and let's say those are those active 3 days out of a week. And then you have you know, just regular users and like people that eventually you've activated to be users. And then you have those power users. Okay, these are the users you want to follow. That's your focus metric. It's kind of like focused on them. And all the rest are those buckets of users that you're trying to kind of like escalate into those, that, you know, that good bucket, that those users that eventually drive your growth. So then I tied that, and this is kind of like behavior analytics. Okay, I looked at their behavior, but I tied that with market dynamics. And what that means is, for example, a specific market, am I growing positively or negatively, right? So it's positive and negative in terms of growth to understand the momentum that I may have. And then think about market share. If I have high market share, low market share, medium market share, kind of like create different models for that, different models for the growth, different models for user behavior for that focus metric. There's another thing I did here. I took that focus metric of users that are active 7 out of 7 days, and feel free to ask questions if you know, if I'm you know, going too fast, and maybe we can dive into this after. So I took that focus metric and then I kind of like flipped it around. So there's like the active 7 days out of 7 days a week. And then I took, remember, you could do the other way around, and you could go ahead and say, okay, let's see how many users I have that are active only 1 day a week. And what does that mean? If I have a lot of users that are active 1 day a week, only 1 day a week, in a country where I have a high market share, and you know, this is tied to the business and right into the industry and to the game that we're playing. So for us, it's tied to the address book. Market share is related to the address book, right? If I have high market share, everyone's using this messaging app. So eventually, if I have a lot of users that are using, you know, and relating to all my users. So for example, number of users that are active 1 day out of all my users, and I have a high percentage there, but I have a high percentage of market share. This is a low-hanging fruit. There could be some need there that I'm not addressing. And just, you know, to share with you the findings with this, I played around with the data, and I've kind of like took all the, you know, kind of like created like, you know, all the opportunities or the possibilities, and broke this down to eventually, you know, from 110 countries, and you can imagine how many user segments, to just 9 models. And then looking at these models, I was able to spot millions of users that are actually using the app like 25 times a day on the first and second day, but then you know, they don't use the app anymore on that week. You know, creating a cohort for these users can help you understand what these users are doing on that first day, and then could help you introduce, you know, anything that would solve their need. Even if it would be to, you know, cohort these users, segment them, target them with an in-app message or an email campaign, asking them to join your survey or focus group, and just trying to understand, you know, what they're, you know, why they're behaving the way that they're behaving. Is this a desired behavior, or is this an unsolved need? And basically this model, you could take it and really build an iterative product roadmap based on it, because the decisions you make and the prioritizations you make are eventually measurable. And this model helps you measure that. And that was for me like a big kind of like aha moment, looking at data and looking at marketing, and not just data, but behavioral data. And I think that another point to mention is really the difference between transactional data and behavioral data, behavioral analytics. And it's being able not to just like look at the totals and averages and just only on the conversions, but really trying to understand the set of actions that the users are doing that eventually lead them to you know, some sort of conclusion. It could be to be retained, it could be to buy, and it could be to eventually, right, churn from your app, from your product. Yeah, so that's basically it. Before we go to like a thank you slide, are there any questions maybe that we want to address, or any topics or commentary that maybe you want to make on this?
No, I would say please feel free to submit any questions. We're going to move into the Q&A shortly. We're also going to be sharing a feedback survey in the chat as well. So if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on how you found the session today, and yeah, that would be great. But thank you very much for that, Idan. It was a great presentation, and I think it's great to see how you applied the framework to the businesses you've worked at, particularly Viber, and also that final slide around the kind of the opportunity sizing that you did. I think it's those aha moments are really where you start to dig into the data and, you know, want to leverage that even more.
Yeah, it's kind of like you understand it's valuable when you reach those points when you have question marks and you don't know what to do. You know, when you have problems, you ask questions. When everything flows, right, you just try to run faster. But basically what, you know, we started off by saying this, and it's like, if you could go ahead and take one thing from this, you know, from this work session, is ask yourself the tough questions in the beginning. Think what would be a winning scenario, how do you measure it, and how to focus, right? So startups is all about focus. This is how you focus on a metric, and that metric should drive your growth.
Great. So yeah, please feel free to submit any questions because we have 5 minutes left. We've had a couple of questions around the framework as well, if we can share that. So yeah, absolutely we can. And we will be following up with that. Mm-hmm. So we've had a question come through from Fernando. He says, we have job boards. Some users post jobs, other users perform those jobs and receive a payment. The business grow if the amount of paid contracts grows, but it's not clear for us if something like amount of paid contracts monthly or quarterly would work as a focus metric.
So if that metric grows, the business grows. That makes sense because revenue drives the business growth, right? But can we think about this as value? What would drive to those payments? Like what, like looking at an end result for me is kind of, it could be either, it could be a little bit too late because you can't really learn much from it. And, you know, that's kind of like, sometimes it could be like a lagging metric. And so looking for a leading metric on that end would be trying to think like, maybe it's like, if it's job boards, then maybe it could be, you know, steps in that process, and like, you know, how many times you like opted in on a specific post, or you showed interest and you got a response, and eventually you've kind of like started to, you know, started a process. I don't know how to really call it in terms of this specific industry, but anywhere in that funnel from, you know, being active to, you know, just before closing would be, I think, a better metric for you. That's kind of like my thought. What do you think, Harriet?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there's kind of two sides to that as well. You've got the people that are obviously posting the jobs, and then you've got the people performing those jobs, and what are the value moments for those different groups of users. I think as well, looking at conversion would be interesting too, in terms of what's the completion rate from someone posting a job to receiving the payment, and what's the time there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Marketplace is also, it's a different game, right? Because there's the buyers and the sellers. And so what is more crucial to your business? Is it the people coming to look for a job, or the people posting that job? And, you know, think about that in terms of growth. If you have so many job posts and relevant job posts, you know, maybe that would drive your buyers to come in.
Yeah, definitely. Did we have any other questions? Feel free to submit them now in the Q&A. We did actually have a question earlier as well around the B2B business, and if we had any examples of focus metrics for B2B products. I don't know if you've seen any good examples of that, Dan.
Well, I have, personal example is I had a startup in the, for the restaurant industry. And so I had like, people making orders inside restaurants, and I had the businesses, the restaurants themselves. And so also in another startup, I had something similar where it's a marketplace which involved, again, businesses at the end. And so when I was focused on growing the business, I was focused on, for example, I wanted to get into restaurants, or I wanted to get into the other businesses, then I was focused at that specific point on getting more users. Because then you go ahead and pitch your user base. It's like, hey, I can fill empty seats, for example, in a restaurant. So, while being a B2B, again, this was a B2C one. But if we're just a B2B, then for me, it was, how many good paying customers I have. Meaning that are not only like they didn't just buy my product, they're using my product. They're getting value out of my product. So what would drive their value? So it's kind of like a customer success standpoint. How could I ensure that they are happy? Is it because they made more profit because of my solution, or, anything else?
Yeah, and we can also share ours. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. So, Dan, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Can you just confirm? Great. So this is our example, which is outlined in the blog that we shared in the chat as well. So our focus metric relates to weekly answering users. So the number of users who answered a question in the past 7 days. So we're obviously a B2B business, and our focus metric is actually focused on the individual. But like Idan said as well, we would look at this from a customer success perspective as well. So looking at those users in relation to the businesses as well. So how many of those weekly answering users do you have in each business as well? Yeah. Great. So we actually have one more question. We have a couple more minutes to take this, I think. So they work on a mostly enterprise, some B2C learning product that is mostly standalone for now. We're relaunching it on our new learning platform so there can be access to other courses. But what to do for users in the meantime who are likely to use your product only once? So value moment might be finished course, but there's not a lot of repeat usage because many users might be there to take a course because their company suggested it. Any thoughts on that one, Idan?
My thoughts is that, if it's only, if there's no repeat business, then it should be easy for you to improve that, top of funnel. Because, most business should be on retention, and maybe there's a way to look at this from a retention standpoint. Maybe there are other things that you could offer them that would get them back. I'm pretty sure you tried, but it's really, this types of questions would need to really try and understand the business a little bit more to really be able to, to recommend anything. If you want to, I shared my email. You could go ahead and email me and share some specifics on the business, and I'll give it some more thought. And hopefully, respond with a reply.
Yeah, sorry we were running out of time for the last one, but yeah, we will follow up. And just a reminder again as well, if you wouldn't mind sharing some feedback, the survey is linked in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much for today, Idan, and thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, you can expect the recording of the session within 24 hours, like we mentioned. So
thank you guys for taking the time, and thanks Harriet for the great help. It's been fun, and yeah, hopefully we've proved some value to the viewers and listeners here. And feel free to share comments. And if you have any questions, again, you can feel free to reach out to me, and be glad to help.
Same. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Okay, well, thanks everyone, and yeah, have a great day or evening, depending where you are.
Bye bye, guys.